A couple days removed from the Red River rivalry, and I can't stop thinking about that ass whooping that Texas put on Oklahoma 34-3 in the Cotton Bowl.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, it's Monday, so Tony Monk from Spot on Sports joining the show as always during the football season. First segment, Red River takeaways and reactions. In the second segment, our players of the game who shine the brightest at the State Fair in the Cotton Bowl. And then in the last segment, Oklahoma's schedule. They're now 4-2 after 6 games. What will the Sooners end up with some very tough games on their schedule? Tennessee, or they already played Tennessee, but Ole Miss, Alabama, and Missouri. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So first, we're going to start with our Red River takeaways and reactions, and I'm going to go first. The first one I have is that the pageantry of college football in Red River is unmatched. You know, I grew up an NFL fan, and I had to kind of develop my college football fandom, you know, because growing up, I just wanted to be just like my grandpa. And he was, a Cowboys fan and a Rangers fan, but he never really had an allegiance to any university. And so over time, I grew up, Vince Young, Colt McCoy, and I became a Texas fan. And I believe there's 3 types of football fans, right? There's your football fans that watch the NFL but don't really watch college. There's your football fans like me and Tony that watch both. And then you have your college football fans that don't really enjoy the NFL. And yesterday, I kind of felt like those college football fans that don't typically enjoy the NFL, right? Because the passion of college football is different. The pageantry of college football is different, especially when you're talking about Red River. When you talk about that environment that those 2 teams played in on Saturday, right? You got all of those Oklahoma fans at the State Fair getting drunk, eating corn dogs, whatever, before 2:30, before the game started. You got all that burnt orange out there, all those Texas fans getting lit at the State Fair, congregating, getting ready before the game started. Then you go into the Cotton Bowl, one of the most historic venues in college football. You're split at the 50. You got burnt orange on this side. You got, crimson on the other side, right? You run into the stadium, you're running into boos, and then you're running into cheers, or you're running into cheers, and then you're running into boos on the opposite side of the field. The NFL just cannot recreate that environment that we saw on Saturday. And then you look at the passion of the players, right? Last year, Oklahoma wins it, and they rock the shirts that say, Oklahoma only fears God, Texas fears Oklahoma. This year, Texas wins it, and they plant the flag in the middle of the field, and then whatever they did, cut up a Baker Mayfield jersey. I don't know what they did, but just the passion, seeing the Texas players and coaches at the end of the game rocking the golden hat, Steve Sarkisian wearing it in the interview, Jahdae Barron, Quinn Ewers, all of those players putting on the golden hat. It just means so much, right? You cannot recreate that in the NFL. And then I've seen both sides of it, right? I've seen Texas players lose, Red River. I've seen Oklahoma players lose Red River, and they just look dejected, right? They just look depressed. I mean, they just look like in that moment, their life is over. You see these NFL players lose games, and they're dapping up, smiling at the end of the game, doing jersey swaps. It's just way different in college football. The pageantry of college football in Red River is unmatched. And like I said, I see why people might favor college football over the National Football League, because you just can't recreate that in the NFL. Second takeaway I have is the quarterback and the head coach combo will determine a lot of games, right? I get it. It's Red River, and so we have seen a lot of crazy things happen in the Cotton Bowl. We've seen as recently as 3 years ago, Texas smoke a 21-point lead when a quarterback by the name of Caleb Williams, came in and introduced himself to the world, right? So we have seen some pretty crazy things in that building when Texas and Oklahoma play. But, quarterback and head coach combo determine a lot of games. So I get why, Texas fans may have been nervous coming into this game, even though we had the far superior team. But when you look at it, a lot of times it can boil down to who has the better quarterback and who has the better head coach. Steve Sarkisian has built a juggernaut at the University of Texas. And in the 2 wins, he has dominated Brent Venables. I know Oklahoma won last year, but for the most part, he has dominated Brent Venables in this matchup. It is time, if they even are in the same sentence, if people were putting them in the same sentence, to stop putting them in the same sentence. Steve Sarkisian, in terms of a roster builder, in terms of a head coach, in terms of a play caller, is just miles ahead of Brent Venables right now. And then you want to talk about the quarterback position. I understand they're both young and they may have bright futures ahead of them in terms of Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins. But even a rusty C+B- Quinn Ewers was miles ahead of Michael Hawkins Jr. in the Cotton Bowl on Saturday. So you could talk about all these different positions and all these different factors, but really that game boiled down to Texas had a clear advantage at head coach and quarterback, and that's why they won 34-3. Last thing I want to say is Texas was better than Oklahoma at every position, and that's not something I'm used to seeing, right? Oklahoma fans talked all week about how they were, had won 11 out of the last 15, and they, largely over the last decade and a half have dominated this matchup. That is the truth. I cannot remember a game where Texas was better than Oklahoma at every single position. And we won 49-0 2 years ago, right? From quarterback to running back, offensive line, wide receiver, tight end. They talked about their front seven, and then Trey Wisner had the best game of his career, going for 9 yards a carry, right? Every single position, their front seven, their corners, offense, Texas dominated them at every single position. This used to be a proud Oklahoma program. I mean, think about all the NFL players that have come through Norman, Oklahoma. And even worse than the 49-0 game, I just felt like Texas outclassed them at every position on Saturday. It absolutely was not close. So, yeah, you could talk about the last 15 years. It's Texas time now in this rivalry. Tony, what you got?
John, I should have probably played some church music while you was doing that, brother. That was that was a blessed monologue to be able to start this show, and what a way to do that. Yeah, I was thinking in my head earlier when you was talking about the passion that's in rivalry games for college, and I was like, well, the NIL deals ruin that now because we got a handful of guys that have jumped in the portal and say we're gonna take on being a red shirt again and then play again for this other team. But what a what a dominant win by this Longhorn football team. And I did think back to the 49-0 game that they had a couple of years ago, and I was like, well, they dominated them in such a major fashion back then, but this time did feel a little bit different. And from a team that is well coached by Sark and was able to dominate OU in all phases of the football. Now, it did come down to one thing at the end of the day. Was the first question you would probably ask is who has the better quarterback? Well, even when Ewers is coming back off the injury, we would say it's still him over a guy that just took the spot for OU 2 games ago. And credit to Sark for finding ways to get Ewers comfortable because it did not look pretty to start the game. Now, we were just spoiled the last couple of weeks, John, watching Arch Manning throw the ball 60, 50, 70 yards to Ryan Wingo and Isaiah Bond and all of these guys, and kids are flying around the field and we're looking explosive. And then we get back to this more or less of a time passing attack, drop, 3-step drop, boom, we're here in the flats, boom, we're here in the intermediate passing route. And it looks slower. But I knew a lot of that was just due to the fact that, all right, Quinn Ewers hadn't played a game in a couple of weeks, and then boom, you wake up and have to play Texas' greatest rival in all of history in OU. But I really feel like that Sark had to really put his coaching skins on the wall again and say, you know what, I do have a quarterback that has been missing time, but I do have a running game that can kind of help us out when we need to. My defense. John, we spent the last 2 weeks, even last week with Texas not playing, and then everything broke loose because we let Alabama taste number one, and then they coughed it up no sooner than they had it. But we've watched teams kind of fail to really play a strong defensive game, and Texas has been doing it. We asked the question weeks ago: is this Texas defense possibly the best in college football right now? And then I see Anthony Hill Jr. flying around making plays all over the field. I see this defense that's still able to that's finding its way to get after the quarterback with a pass rush. And I'm almost like, yeah, they pretty much may have it. Now there's the real Georgia test. We're going to face an NFL talent quarterback in Carson Beck next week that we're really going to find out what this Texas defense is made of. But we've still been placing some high level talent. And Texas defense has rose to the occasion time and time and time again. And so I was definitely happy to see one other side of the ball be very complimentary to another side that was kind of lacking in its paces in the early part of the game. Going back to excuse me, going back to quarterback Quinn Ewers. Going back to Quinn Ewers when watching him, and I'm like, and I'm watching with some friends, and they're chirping like, "Oh, put Arch Manning back in, put Arch Manning back in." I'm like, nah, we gotta give this guy some time to kind of knock out the rust, kind of come back. And when Texas defense was able to kind of get those two early fumble recoveries that was kind of back to back from the OU offensive drives, I think that's when Quinn really started to kind of settle in, really started to really be able to get into a rhythm. Shout out to the offensive core around him with Trey Wiseman being able to run the ball like he did. Guys like Ryan Wingo producing big play with his big play ability, being able to do a lot of run out to catch things. I think the team around Ewers was able to definitely rise for him on that day. And I just think that just kind of helped move some things along. And then you kind of seen Quinn Ewers able to do Quinn Ewers things as we kind of got deeper into the game. My next takeaway is, yeah, OU wasn't close in having a better quarterback. And now I like Michael Hawkins, young kid. He fought. He did the things that I think he was trying to do to get OU back in the game. But this Texas looked shoulders above what OU looked like. And yeah, this OU team, I was thinking, John was like, all right, if anybody's going to be able to flip the script on Texas, it's got to be OU, right? Like OU is always a team that kind of comes up and is able to put 40 on Texas and able to really challenge Texas from start to finish. And it did not look close outside of maybe the first drive for both teams. And I was like, okay, talent has to take over at some point. And Texas talent began to outweigh what OU was able to do. And again, for what Sark did, having to really put his coaching skills out there on display. And no, it's not close to the type of coach he is and the type of coach that OU has. But I thought it ended up being a highly complete game. And I think Sark definitely deserves a lot of credit for what happened yesterday relative to the players on the field being able to kind of make plays, because you got to get these guys schemed open at the end of the day. And I think Sark really did a good job at that.
Yeah, for sure. Just a dominant performance, offensively, defensively, even special teams, what they were able to do in terms of returns and, got a couple of field goals. Like I said, forget the past. That's all Oklahoma Sooners, fans and their players have right now. Today, and moving forward, Texas is just a better team and they're the better program. And it showed up in a big way on Saturday. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into our players of the game. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Remember, terms and conditions do apply. All right, bringing Tony back in. Second segment, players of the game. Who stood out to you in this matchup, Tony?
My boy, Gunnar Helm. I said him, in the second week when I started kind of getting my Texas bearings and everything together, and I said, you give me a guy that's kind of a blue collar worker, man, a guy that can definitely catch the passes out the backfield. You and I have, the fantasy football chat, and the question came through yesterday was what is the 9th ranked tight end NFL prospect, and Gunnar Helm, was he like Travis Kelce? Yeah, I'm like, is this where we came? We see a guy.
That's just Luis. Luis always got some crazy takes.
I know. I mean? Like, is this how far?
But I think the good question was, is it Gunnar Helm or is it Sark, right? And I think it's You know, a little bit of both, right? I think Sark obviously one of the best schemers in college football, but Gunnar Helm is a damn good football player as well.
Well, you need a guy to make plays, man, and to kind of do that dirty work for you. Gunnar Helm is definitely that guy. And, 5 catches, 91 yards, average 18 yards to catch, and that touchdown. And that's not always going to just jump off the screen at you, but when it's making plays like Gunnar Helm in the fashion that he's doing it, I think he deserves his limelight for this right now. How about Trey Wisner, right? I'm sure we both got him on our list. Been able to take a majority of the rest from Jaden Blue, 118 yards rushing on the day. And he was another guy, well, early in the season when I said, I want to see Quintravian Wisner get more opportunities. Some days, and if that's a game where he's taking more carries than Jaden Blue, and I'm not going to say that had a whole lot to do with the fumble. I know Jaden only averaged about 3 yards on that day, but just a kid running with power, able to kind of really make a lot of those dirty yards when I think Quinn was really struggling to kind of get going. And I did speak on the defense being super complimentary and helping get Quinn settled. But, what does that better than what the run game can do? And I think Quintravian Wisner really showed up. Ryan Wingo, big true freshman, man. And just watching this kid, and I'm like, that's what I wanted to ask you, John. I wanted to ask you, who is the most explosive receiver on this team?
I still go with Isaiah Bond. And I think that you missed him in this game. You were obviously still able to, perform at a high level. But I mean, you saw 3 plays into the game, he was wide open in the middle of the field. If Quinn would have hit him, he would have ran, hit his head on the goalpost for 70. I just think what he can do in terms of speed, power, and route running. I think Ryan Wingo might be second for sure, but I still would give it to Isaiah Bond right now.
That's fair. That's fair. But I think every time this kid touches the ball, man, I'm wondering, this is gonna be a house call. Like, is he really gonna take this? Like every single time he catches the ball, I'm really asking myself, he's either gonna break this, he's gonna find that open space, and he's gonna smoke everybody for at least 50, 60 yards for a touchdown. So big ups to Ryan Wingo on that day. I got Anthony Hill Jr., another kid that's kind of been on an up and up each time. He's got he kind of reminded me yesterday a lot of our boy for Dallas, DeMarvin Overshawn. Just kind of being around, first person to the ball type beat, led the team in tackles, 2 sacks, had the incredible forced fumble that he kind of forced on that, I believe is that second ensuing drive from the first fumble that OU had. And just a dog, man. Boy's got that dog mentality. I just know next year he's going to be crazy, and I can't wait for it. And not to just skip ahead from Texas season right now, but when you got all these young guys like Ryan, like Anthony Hill Jr. that's just able to make all these plays, it makes you wonder what's going to happen when they are the leaders of their respective sides of the ball, being that a receiving core, and even for Anthony Hill Jr. being that a defense. So those are my guys. As far as my players of the game.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Gunnar Helm as well. I stopped thinking about what Tony was gonna write down. I was like we got the same player. We got the same player. Gunnar Helm, just an amazing game. We saw him. I believe he scored a touchdown last year in Red River as well. And he had kind of been quiet the last couple of games. But in big games, you need your big-time players to make big-time plays. How about Gunnar Helm this year? 5 for 91 and a touchdown against Oklahoma, 7 for 98 and a touchdown against Michigan. Your 2 biggest games of the season, Gunnar Helm has been your leading receiver and has changed the math on offense for the Texas Longhorns, right? Because you're looking at Ryan Wingo, Trey Wisner, Isaiah Bond had left the game, but you're worried about everything on the outside. And then next thing you know, you got to figure out how to stop Gunnar Helm. And you could talk about scheming him open, right? You could talk about how he might not be Jatavian Sanders. You can't scheme him catching a ball in the middle of 3 defenders when Matthew Golden just throws it up. You can't scheme that at all. So Gunnar Helm had a hell of a game. And then we don't talk enough about what he does in the blocking game. Obviously, we know that that's, Sark's bread and butter in this offense. Silas Bolden, right? I talked about how Silas Bolden hadn't necessarily had his moment out of the 6 wide receivers that we talked about coming into the season. I felt like they had all had their moment, thus far. Isaiah Bond, over 100 yards against UTSA and Mississippi State from scrimmage, touchdowns in both of those games. Ryan Wingo, of course, I feel like he's had like 4 or 5 plays this year already of 40+ yards, and he's kind of gone crazy. Matthew Golden, the 2 touchdowns against Colorado State. Jonte Cook, the 2 touchdowns against UTSA. DeAndre Moore going for over 100 yards against Mississippi State. All the wide receivers had their moment thus far, but Silas Bolden. And it's funny because in this game, Silas Bolden had 1 catch for 3 yards, but he had the 2 big plays that were memorable for the Texas Longhorns. Obviously, Trey Wisner averaged 9 yards a carry. He was phenomenal on Saturday, but he did have a fumble when the game was 7-3 that maybe could have turned the tide of the game. And then you watch Silas Bolden run 55 yards from the backfield to the end zone to recover that fumble and make the score 14-3, which at that point put the game out of reach. We knew Oklahoma wasn't scoring 14 points, right? So Silas Bolden.
I don't want to cut you off, but I really like how Sark still was able to trust Wisner on that ensuing offensive drive to give him the ball again, and then he breaks that large run. So like I really love that Sark did that.
For sure. Yeah, definitely great trust there with Trey Wisner. It's not like, you know what I mean, he could trust Jaden Blue more. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they both fumbling, you know what I'm saying? And so then, Silas Bolden with the 55-yard fumble recovery for Texas to go up 14-3. And then he had the 55-yard punt return later in the game that really changed the math for Texas and made it easier for them to get a scoring drive. So Silas Bolden, we've been waiting on him to have his big imprint on the game. And what bigger way to do it than in the Red River rivalry? I thought he was special on Saturday. The offensive line, you talked about Trey Wisner. I'm going to talk about the guys that were blocking for him. I thought they were phenomenal, right? They really gave Quinn time, allowed him to get comfortable in this game, but also allowed Trey Wisner to have the best game of his career, right? It felt like he wasn't getting contacted until 5 or 6 yards down the field. I mean, those lanes, I was watching on ABC, right? And I felt like I could see the whole damn near as good as Trey Wisner could. I mean, good Lord. The offensive line was blocking their ass, so I've got to give them credit. Anthony Hill, quarterback of the defense. I've said he's a future SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Might not get it this year, but damn sure looking good for next year. I mean, 11 tackles, 2 sacks, 3.5 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. Would you believe, Tony, there were Oklahoma fans saying this week they could take advantage of Anthony Hill? Child, please. And then I want to give love to the secondary, right? They did not allow a reception over 15 yards. And I'm not going to sit here and try to qualify what they did and say Oklahoma was missing their top 5 wide receivers. I really don't give a damn. They didn't give up a reception over 15 yards. In comparison, Texas had 4 receptions of over 20 yards, right? Oklahoma did not get a reception over 15. Texas had 4 over 20, right? And so that really determined the game. This secondary has been special all year. And I'm tired of waiting to qualify what they do, right? I'm tired of waiting on them to play an elite offense or an offense with a pulse to say they're elite. I came out of that game on Saturday and said this defense is elite regardless of who they've played thus far. But really, this whole team is elite, right? From top to bottom. This is the best team in the country by far, in my opinion. And, we're going to have a tough matchup on Saturday night against Georgia. But I think based on what we've seen from the Bulldogs and based on what we've seen from the Longhorns, Texas should have the advantage, especially being at home going into that game. But those are our players of the game from this past Saturday in Red River. Quick word from the sponsors, and then we talk about Oklahoma's schedule. Are they fighting to get to 7-5 this year? The Sooners, a blue blood program? Sheesh. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. That's just one of the great features on the Gametime app. Some other ones, all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, getting out of here talking about the Oklahoma football schedule because why not, right? So when you look at it, Oklahoma is now 4-2 on the season. A lot of people told Oklahoma fans that coming into the season, they'd be lucky to go 8-4. Maybe 7-5, 6-6 were realistic, and they said that people were hating on them. They said this was a 10-win team, unquestionably. They said, why is Texas getting the benefit of the doubt and Oklahoma's not? Some Oklahoma Sooner fans said they would win the Big 12. Win the SEC. Looking in the rearview mirror, said that they would win the SEC, win the conference this year. And so let's look at their schedule and see what is realistic for them based on what we've seen over the last 6-7 weeks, and especially over the last couple of weeks. So the first week they beat Temple 51-3. Definitely sounds like a statement win, right? Not a statement win, but what's the word I'm looking for? A convincing win, even over a team like Temple. But in that game, they only completed 8% of their third downs. And so I think we started to see, even, against an inferior opponent, where this offense could potentially struggle. The next week, they only beat Houston 16-12. They needed a safety at the end of the game just to force Houston to have to score a touchdown and kind of put that game away. But 16-12, entirely too close against a Houston team that's just not very good. Came back against Tulane 34-19. Nothing to say about that. So they started the season 3-0. Then they had their first real test, their SEC opener against Tennessee. They lost 15-25. Jackson Arnold was benched. Sooner fans will tell you that Michael Hawkins came in that game and they showed life, I guess, right? Josh Heupel is on, record. You can hear it, in that video that circulated on social media saying he took his foot off the gas. So, we'll never know, right? If Michael Hawkins showed life or if, Tennessee took their foot off the gas. Nonetheless, they lost that game 25-15. Then they come back against Auburn 127-21, but Auburn was in firm control of that game until Peyton Thorpe, whatever his name is, threw the pick six and allowed Oklahoma to win at the end. They should have lost that game, right? But they won it because Auburn's going to Auburn. Then they had the bye, and then obviously their last game this past Saturday in Red River, they lost 34-3. So we're looking at a 4-2 team that very easily could be 3-3 if Auburn was able to hang on, and if Houston was able to pull off the upset. This potentially is a 2-4 football team. But right now they're 4-2. Okay, so we look at their next game. They play South Carolina at home. Let me make sure it's at home. Right, I got my notes over here. Yes, it's at home, and this is a game that Oklahoma should win, whether Michael Hawkins is at quarterback or they go back to Jackson Arnold. But we just saw a South Carolina team almost knock off Alabama on the road, right? The South Carolina team is certainly better than their record. They were up 17 points on LSU, who looks really good right now, and they beat Kentucky 31-3. And Kentucky's given some really good teams trouble this season. So I would not be surprised if South Carolina beats Oklahoma at home next week, right? Then after that, they have to go to Ole Miss. I know Ole Miss has lost to Kentucky. I know Ole Miss has lost to LSU, but that's still a really talented Ole Miss team who would be favored, especially at home against Oklahoma, the way they're playing right now. After that, they play Maine. I'll give them a win against Maine. Right? I'll give them a win against Maine. Right? And then after that, they go to Missouri. Not too confident in that one for Missouri necessarily because, they almost lost to Vanderbilt, went to 2 overtimes with them, even though Vanderbilt does look like a solid football team at this point, and then just went down to College Station and got smoked by Texas A&M. So, both Missouri and Oklahoma, are two teams that are probably overrated by their fans. Then they have another bye week. They play Alabama at home. I don't see any way they beat Alabama, even with the way they've been struggling. And then they go to LSU, and I think they lose that game as well. So now when you look at the Sooner schedule, based on them being 4-2 right now, still having to go to Ole Miss, still having to go to Missouri, still having to play Alabama, having to play South Carolina, which could be tough, and having to go to LSU, like I said, this Sooner team will be fighting to go 7-5 by the end of the season, and maybe 6-6 is realistic. Tough times for them boys up in Norman. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.